Thank you. My name is Peter Wanders. I'm the president and CEO. Wait, it's fashioned by Carla Fernandez Designs. Pop up outside. Up in my game. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Peter Wanders, president and CEO of the ranch. On behalf of our trustees, the national council members who make the ranch function and possible, and our staff, I really want to welcome you. This is going to be a really great conversation. This series is underwritten by the Lewis family in honor of Toby Lewis. Many of you in the room knew Toby, know what an impact she had on the ranch and all of the Aspen community in the art world, and we really want to honor her memory as part of this series. We have a group of individual underwriters who help make this series possible. Sarah Arison and Tom Willem, Jill and Jay Bernstein, Rona and Jeff Citron, Ann Cook, Charlie Moss, Eleanor and Domenico Di Soleil, Shara and Joe Felsen, Barbara and John Lee, Liza and John Mauk, Katie and Amnon Rodan, Lee and Reggie Smith, and Ellen Sussman. If the list gets any longer, we're going to put it up on the screen, but thank you to them for all that support. We have a few corporate underwriters that help make this possible. I think Kapira Ryan is here. Christie's Auction House has been a long time supporter of the ranch. We appreciate that. Pure Insurance underwrites this series. United Airline helps us get them here and back. So we really appreciate that. Cultured Magazine has been our media sponsor, and Sarah Harrelson, the editor and founder of Cultured, has helped curate the program this summer and put these together. So I really want to thank her. She's not allowed to be here tonight, but she's been in and out of town, and I know she's friends with so many of you. We'll get to our talk. We're excited to have our two speakers here today. Mia Locks is an independent curator, an executive director of Museums Moving Forward. Really interesting organization. You're going to look it up, or I'll have to talk too long, and they won't get a chance to talk. She most recently was the curator in-house at the Whitney. She's been at MoMA PS1, LA MoCA. She's organized exhibitions around the country. She's got a few around the world going on right now. But that includes some notable ones: 2017 Whitney Biennial, Greater New York 2015. Colleen Smith has a project with Mia going at the moment. She was a speaker, as you know, for us, I think a year and a half ago, and a really great friend of the ranch, so excited about that. Our guest of honor today, Pedro, we're excited to have you here. Pedro describes himself as a sculptor, and I find that a little bit under the radar of all of the complexity of what he does. His work integrates theater, architecture, psychology, social practice, or social experimentation. His role as an international public figure and an activist has garnered him some amazing awards. His work ranges from sculptures. Judy and Robbie Mann are here, I think. They've commissioned a sculpture in town here, which was part of what helped us bring Pedro to town, so we're excited about that work. Puppet productions, and as many of you have probably seen or read about, the collection of thousands and thousands of guns, turning some of these guns into shovels and using them to plant over 1,500 trees, making musical instruments with these recycled guns. Music boxes. He's been recognized by the U.S. State Department with the Medal of the Arts. There's so many fellowships and awards, I can't list them all. In 2021, he received the Luxembourg Peace Prize for his work around nuclear disarmament. And most recently, last year, had a premiere of the Direct Action program at Site Santa Fe. I know many of you go down there and have probably seen that show. And that has now grown into a project called Artists Against the Bomb. And I'm sure we're going to hear all about some of those today. Super excited to have you here, Pedro. Mia, thank you so much. We're honored to have you lead the conversation. I'm going to pass to you.
Thank you. All right. Hi, everybody. It's a total honor for me to talk to Pedro. I mean, Peter gave a really lovely introduction, but this is an artist who really spans like beyond media and ideas and has tons of interests. So we're going to try to just talk casually about a number of different things. If there's something that you're dying to know or want to hear about, just kind of hold it in your head, because we'll definitely have time for Q&A at the end. I think as a starting point, since it seemed I heard some like support and interest in the kind of gun transformation project, and so maybe we'll start there. That project, I mean, began in a lot of different ways, but I'd love, Pedro, if you would talk a little bit about how a project like that even starts, because my understanding is that was in collaboration with tons of different entities to actually use guns that had been confiscated from the war on drugs. And so how does an artist even begin a project like that?
You know, like, This kind of projects is what I like to call them social sculpture, in the sense that, you know, like what sculptors do is to change the shape of matter. No, like you take something and you know, like transform it. But when you're engaging with communities, part of your material is, you know, like other uh, agents in society, no? So in this case, for instance, it was a mix of state, private, and citizen entities, in the sense that I was invited to do there's a philanthropist called Agustin Koppel who has a botanical garden with an art collection, and he invited me to do a sculpture, and I wanted to do something that would have an impact in the community. So the material to gather was, you know, like guns that were like, so we called in a campaign for voluntary donation of weapons, and we did a number of TV spots inviting people to bring a gun to the city hall, and then those guns were destroyed, melted, and made into shovels, and with those shovels we did planting of trees. So, you know, like there was like the element of a private philanthropist sponsoring the project, but also the guns to be kind of handled. It had to be the army who did that, but the people who took the shovels or took the guns and bring them were citizens. So that's what I think is a social sculpture, something where you have to kind of create an idea that will galvanize elements of society that don't necessarily talk to each other or work together, but that if you present them with an idea that is compelling enough, they will collaborate on that. So that, I think, is like, you know, like in the idea of social sculpture, as Joseph Beuys had first enunciated this concept, no?
Yeah, and I would just add, and it was mentioned too, that they weren't just turned into shovels, they've also were turned into musical instruments. And so they've been performed by musicians, and I think there's something, I mean, beyond just kind of profound, there's something just really beautiful and sort of lyrical about the idea of transforming, obviously, an object of violence into this very sort of transformative and also really collaborative experience. And so the pieces, I mean, can you say a little more about just the ways the instruments have been sort of utilized? Because there's been a couple sort of iterations of it.
Yes, it's like the instruments is very interesting because, for instance, taking a rifle and drilling holes in the rifle so it becomes a flute, or a guitar, or these elements is, you know, this is precisely, for instance, like seeing here in the ranch, like the sculpture department which specializes on direct metal. No, when you work with direct metal, you don't have like a model that you do a cast and then, you know, it's more about like grabbing pieces of junk and welding them together. So you don't go through a sketch or something. It's more about like kind of assembling existing elements, and a little bit working like a caveman, in the sense that, you know, like you take this raw material that is the gun parts, and then you blow or scratch or see what kind of sounds they can produce. But I think that what is interesting is that I'm not a musician and I don't know how to play an instrument, so I can deal with a kind of a visual desirable thing, but I have to work to partner with someone who makes instruments to get, like, you know, like the pickup for a guitar, or the holes in the for a flute in the right place for it to work as an instrument. And then someone else will take that instrument and play and create music with it. So I think that it's just like a kind of a face, the object. I think that that's a part of the kind of bridge between sculpture and social practice, that an object can be a catalyst for another artwork or an event or an activity that, especially in the case of music, everyone who's listening to someone playing an instrument is kind of connected through this same experience. So in a way, it's like changing the polarity of what weapons are meant to do, because weapons are meant to do two things: either kill or harm, or produce fear, like the threat of the gun being used. So I think that like the idea of changing the polarity of or subverting the original function of this object to change it from an agent of death into an agent of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something really fundamental, and you're seeing a couple images scroll through, and I think you can recognize which ones were formerly guns and are now musical instruments. But there's something about the sort of social practice element in your work, and you're talking about sort of social sculpture, that to me has this really fundamental thread around sort of trust, both with people and with these different entities, but also sort of like this hope or belief in sort of the idea of the social experiment, which is pretty fundamental, I think, to the way you kind of approach art. And I think it connects to this other kind of project of yours that I'd love us to talk about. You probably have seen a few images of it, which is this library project, which started in your home and is still in your home, but now lives in a couple different places. But yeah, maybe we could, I can also not pronounce the title of it, so I'm gonna ask you to say the title of the work, and then, yeah, we can talk a little bit about books and about libraries.
Yes, we have this initiative called Tlacuilo, and Tlacuilo is a word in Nahuatl, which is the ancient language of Mexico, one of the many indigenous languages. But Tlacuilos was a term for both artist and writer, because the historical records were kept in codexes, and the scribes that were the Tlacuilos. But that means that it's a kind of mix of writer and painter. But they were also the librarians. And at the time of the conquest, there was a system of libraries that kept like 15,000 codexes, and they were all burnt, and only 11 survived. So you can imagine how much knowledge was lost. And the idea of having this initiative is because, I don't know, for instance, like I often come to the United States where I have the teaching engagements, and I have, you know, like you have access to a great university library, etc. And in general, I believe that, you know, like whatever you need in life can be found in a book, and I have been trying to activate libraries in Mexico for them to have a effective lending system, and originally had the idea of a library, like an app on your phone that would work as a kind of library card, no, where you could, you know, like control which books each one has, etc. But because, you know, like I needed to, like someone asked me, like, well, what, would you lend your own books? Because, you know, some libraries would not lend books because they didn't trust that people will bring them back. And like museums, for instance, like a lot of museums have a library, and it's not a lending library. It's just for, you know, like a sitting there, or sometimes used by the staff. So there's a lot of libraries around that, you know, like that don't have a lending system. So I decided to do this experiment of starting to lend the books from our own library, and it started to grow and grow and grow, and we have like kind of 30,000 followers in Instagram, you know, and like 500 regular users that ring our bell and go into our living room and take whatever books they want. They take them home. We don't want them to be, it's enough to have them going to our house. They're like, so we don't kind of let them read the books there, because actually the spirit of the project is about the lending culture. Like we say something like, you know, like mi casa es tu casa. what we say, mi cosa es tu cosa, like my thing is your thing, no? We have this idea that a library that does not lend is not a library, it's a jail for books. So we have this sort of social experiment, and it's like a very rewarding. It's a nice experiment.
I think that's like kind of unbelievable. I don't know about you guys, but the idea that like you would open up a library and share things with other people is a lovely idea. But the idea that it's in your home and that strangers could just like ring your doorbell, you're like in your pajamas on like Sunday morning, and they like come in, they want a book, and it's like I feel like that's a real testament to the kind of person you are and to your belief in books and to knowledge, which I think is really beautiful. And I will just say as a segue, and we won't talk about it a lot here, but Pedro's home, which you designed because your background is in architecture and that's what you studied, is also kind of a beautiful sort of sculpture in and of itself. And there might be people in the room that have already seen it, but I know there's an episode of a television show called Home. Has anyone seen this show? Okay, some of you have. There's an episode about their home. So if you're interested, you'll see an image. It's beautiful. I don't know if there's more you want to say about your home, but the library kind of lives within this sculpture too. So you'll see, when you see that image with a lot of books in that beautiful home, that's something. But yeah, is there anything you want to say about the home or about architecture before we move on?
Well, it's I think that there's something that Michelangelo Pistoletto used to say, that artists sometimes work as sponsors of ideas for society, no? So sometimes you launch yourself into doing an experiment. I think that is also like kind of I hope that eventually I will be able to take the library outside our home just for the sanity of, Carla has been very patient and my kids, with this kind of a dynamic. But eventually, I think that the idea is that sometimes you do something in the sense that you just wanna kind of activate a cultural element that doesn't. I believe that, for instance, the library project is not connected like to our home in principle. Right. It's there because it's like a kind of or available infrastructure. But the hope is for it to kind of have a life beyond the walls of the home. And I was trained as an architect, but I went into art, so I haven't had as much chances to practice architecture as I wish. Our house, Carla was also very involved in the design, so sometimes houses become like a little bit like cultural embassies, no? In the sense that you open your house and greet, there's a great culture in Aspen of also this kind of a crucial element of a cultural life of a town, no?
Yeah, we've benefited from that culture. Yeah, I was gonna add to that point about the culture of lending, which I think is, what you were saying about where the kind of library idea came from, and this sort of way that you have a real, I think, really sincere and almost a kind of playfulness too in the work, where you're often like, ooh, could we try this out and sort of scale it to society, to strangers? Could we sort of see what happens? And I'd love you to talk. We're going to talk about a couple more projects, and then we're going to start talking about some of these sculptures that you're seeing too. I'd love to talk a little bit about the amendment to the amendment, I think is what it's called, just as a sort of transition into this concept of, sort of editing and revising and reflection, which I think is also a sort of theme.
Yes, the thing is that, there's a gun problem that is both common to Mexico and the United States, in the sense that, often the blame for gun violence falls on whoever pulls the trigger. But there's a systemic root to this problem, which is, there's gun availability for people get guns that shouldn't have access to them. And whenever you try to do progress on these, often there's like the Second Amendment, which is a very short, only 2 lines amendment that was drafted 200 years ago. And this is another social sculpture in the sense that, I made a sculpture called Amendment that is a hand holding a pencil, but is with the eraser down, because an amendment is precisely that. We gave ourselves as a society laws, but that doesn't mean that those laws were written by God. They were written by humans, and humans need to edit this legislation from time to time. That's why there was called an amendment. So the amendment to the amendment was is a workshop where, let's say that we run it in a group like this. We would break down in groups of 5 or 8 people, and each team is given the task to rewrite the amendment. And at the end, we pass on a microphone, and each team reads what is their improved version of the Second Amendment. And it's very interesting because one person may only change a comma, one person may say, this concept is outdated, we can change it. So it's a concept of a method called legislative theater. It's a sort of a workshop where instead of getting stuck with debating, where one person hijacks the microphone and may go on, it's a very fast way to suddenly let the thoughts of those 200 people that are in the workshop to all their ideas be heard, and the idea of the malleability of the text. That's where the sculpture element. I believe that you can do sculpture with stone or metal, but also you can do sculpture with words. Because you have, you're changing the shape of this matter. So editing, I think that we have to give ourselves a chance to say, well, we can do better. And I think that my idea was to introduce the idea that that effectively have the experience of improving this piece of legislation, which would the border of Mexico and the United States is very permeable, and for us it's a little bit like if your neighbor upstairs had built a pool and is leaking onto your apartment, but only that is leaking guns, because there's I don't know how many millions guns. There are more guns than people in this country. So also we have guns coming. So I see it also as a kind of a thing that would help Mexico and the United States to have more gun control. No?
Yeah. Yeah. God, there's many things I want to say to that. I'll pause for a moment. I think this is actually a really good opportunity to think about this because, so as I mentioned, and as you're seeing, this is an artist who obviously has this belief and is willing to kind of experiment with folks and do what I think we used to call social practice, socially engaged work, social experiments, whatever we want to call it. But also, as you can see from a lot of these images, a real formalist, you also make really beautiful, really hand-wrought objects that similarly are somewhat collaborative, and that you're sort of working with artisans. And you once said something about your studio being a kind of almost like an apprentice, that you're sort of taking these traditions and you're really learning them and kind of keeping them alive in a lot of ways. But I'd love you to talk a little bit about the difference for you, just as an artist, between these projects or these kind of more socially engaged works and a piece, where the where that comes from. There's kind of there's connections in some of them, but yeah, if you could say more about the sculptures that are, I think you see them as sort of allegories of the social practice in a way. Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about the difference between pieces and projects, because projects are like adopting a baby. And in the sense that you cannot put it back in the street, you have to, a kind of it's almost like a lifelong commitment that you have to, keep.
Pedro's going to solve gun violence.
At it, and then, for instance, like making a sculpture that is a discrete entity that once finished will be resilient enough to exist in the world without you is very liberating. Also, I think that for me, working on sculpture for is very nice because perhaps because of my training as an architect, I had always hoped for art to have a second function in society, and because that's what architects do, you solve a program of needs, and eventually, I let myself do art for art's sake, and do got very much into stone carving because it's hard to explain the reason, but it's like in Mexico there's a kind of almost like an energy that is coming from below your feet, because there's these rock formations that were created by the volcanoes that surround the Valley of Mexico, and this volcanic rock was used, I don't know, like 1,000 years to make the pyramids, and then in the colonial times and in the modern times, and this rock formation had been a kind of a quarry where there was like these schools of carving that were done in the 30s, 40s, a little bit inspired by John Dewey's pedagogical ideas, and then stone carving sort of have disappeared around the world, mainly because of robots. And if you go to Carrara and Pietrasanta now, most of the carving is done by robots. And I had found, that there were in Mexico still all these craftsmen that knew how to do this work. So and the first sculptures that I did, I would kind of ask them to do it, and then I appointed several of these kind of master stone carvers in order to train a new generation that would kind of, so the studio could become a sort of school for this trade not to be lost, no? Because I have to say that sculpture has always been a collective practice, in the sense that sometimes these rocks weigh 2 or 3 tons, and it's something that you cannot do alone. Even from medieval times or from Egypt, a sculpture studio had always been a team of people, and I like very much this idea of it doesn't read as social practice at first, this classical sculpture work, but it does has a social dimension that is, this kind of trying to keep this profession going.
Yeah, no, I think there's this, again, I feel like the sort of thread of these social experiments extends to the studio. It's like your studio is a model for what collaboration looks like, or teaching across generations, or thinking about sort of history beyond sort of our immediate present. Yeah, we're looking at some of the stone pieces. I'm wondering too if you want to say anything about, in the spirit of well, actually no, you're doing a book on stone carving that's coming out soon, or next year.
Yes, next year.
Yeah.
A lot of, you may see that for instance, in a lot of these sculptures, there's the titles. They are also using Nahuatl, which is something that if you go to Mexico, every street is in Nahuatl, but we don't know what that means, because we're more used to the etymologies from Greek or Latin that the ones from the original language, and so a little bit as a way to kind of learn myself Nahuatl, I have these titles, which the way they were written, again going back to the Tlaquilo, you would have a kind of a pictogram. So, like for instance, like if you see the name of the mountain, El Popocatépetl, that is like Popol is smoke, Tepetl is mountain, so it's like the smoky mountain. No? And these kind of constructions that once you are acquainted with the language, you can actually like suddenly a world of meaning opens up, and every place of has like suddenly telling you a story, no, through their name, and that creates a lot of images. So turning these images into stone is also a sort of a synthesis where like I'm always negotiating elements from ancient past and from modernity at the same time, because like it's a lot of breakthroughs in modernity were precisely kind of this kind of I mean, in art you always use art from the past. I think that like is you're channeling, you're standing on the shoulders of giants also, no? In the sense that you are, there's so much to learn from things that have been done.
Do you think of it like sort of translation or some, because you're like the sort of distance between antiquity and modernity, is it architectural? Is it like bridge building, or is it more linguistic in this kind of like translation? Or how do you see your kind of role as an artist? Because I feel like this is another sort of theme or interest of yours, right? The relationship between antiquity and modernity.
Yes, I think that like it's a little bit is like this negotiation with moments of 20th century, in the sense that like what we identify as Mexican identity is a lot of times something that was constructed in the 30s, 40s, in what is known as the Mexican Renaissance, no? When Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo and Siqueiros and Orozco and all these artists that were the muralists were creating these visions of what was Mexico as after the Mexican Revolution. It's very different to what we were doing in the 19th century, because in the 19th century, like all around the world, there was like a neoclassical canon, like an academic canon that pretty much everyone was trying to be like Paris, no? Like this kind of and then the Mexican Revolution, it's a kind of an interesting moment, because artists work very closely with the state in the creation of something that would like kind of connect with the ancient past, because as a country that is coming out of a colonial period, you have to present to the world that you're not a colony anymore, and that you are like a country with a kind of a distinctive features. And so that's what is kind of a very nationalistic period in that era, and we usually associate nationalism with something problematic, no? Because in the Second World War there were nationalisms that were fascist and colonialist and imperialist, etc. That there's a generation that comes after Second World War that is called La Ruptura, like, and they were kind of favoring abstraction and saying that nationalism was bad because it was like state sponsored, and it was basically they had there's a famous manifesto called La Cortina de Nopal, same as the Iron Curtain, the Cactus Curtain, because some young artists said, we don't want to be painting only peasants and cactuses. We want abstraction. We want, like a kind of other art. And like I remember as a young artist in the 90s also to kind of be very much more interested in conceptual art and the avant-garde movements that ancient past. But in the 21st century, I think that it's very interesting to create a synthesis of these two. You know, you have thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So the second half that is abstract and conceptual, and the first half that is kind of a figurative and has all these national and revolutionary ideas. I think that if we were to take one of these two, we would lose an important element. You know, like I think that is, so my work is kind of going between these two elements where you have narrative elements as well as an exploration that goes towards a sort of synthesis that you find in abstract art. And every piece that I do, I am trying to kind of find kind of channeling these different elements.
Yeah, that's sort of a mode of yours that it's very apparent in a lot of these sculptures. In the spirit of adopting a baby and not being able to put it back on the street, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the work you've been doing in the last few years around nuclear disarmament, which is, of course, related to some of your, interest in sort of anti-violence or sort of transforming. But yeah, tell us about what you've been doing the last couple of years, other than the sculptures.
Yes. Well, this is probably in the last 4 years. Because of the work I had done with small arms, I was invited to do a project for the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists that have the doomsday clock, and that they are kind of basically checking on how close we are to nuclear war. And the paradox is that we are now 90 seconds to midnight, which is, I think that the closest, like not even in the kind of worst moments of the Cold War, there were so many chances to have a nuclear exchange. But the power, and you all remember. I mean, you remember that in the 80s, this was in everybody's mind, and everybody was very much, like a kind of taking part in these rallies. Like there was like one rally in New York that gathered like in 1982, like 1 million people. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was like this false illusion that the Cold War was over and that this was not a problem anymore. So the people that were born after 1989, which is basically like, two generations, millennials and Gen Zs, they don't really have nuclear war as a kind of one of their concerns. And I often feel a little bit like the crazy guy with the saying that says like the end is near, and I am still in 1982, like in my mind. But the anti-nuclear movement is tiny. I meet with them, and it's like no more than 500 people around the world that are trying to ban the bomb. But the good news is that there's a treaty called the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that was presented at the United Nations very recently in 2021, was open for signatures, and 90 countries have signed the treaty already. When you sign a treaty as a country, basically you say, as a country, I won't ever produce nuclear weapons. I won't let other countries have weapons of mass destruction stationated or located, or I'm not going to produce parts that will be used in nuclear weapons. So, I'm not going to let financial institutions get involved with the production of weapons of mass destruction, etc. So, half of the world have signed the treaty. That doesn't mean that the 9 countries that have nuclear weapons are going to get rid of them anytime soon, but at least there's a legal framework that is not only like kind of protesting. It's like, there's like all these, like a diplomatic work that is being done slowly by ICANN, which is the organization I work with, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And I've been working with them on this cause of banning the bomb. But I didn't want it to be like the only artist doing this, so I came up with a question, no? Which was, how do we turn this thing around? How do we change the polarity? No, because like I can turn a flute, I can turn a rifle or a shotgun into a flute, but I couldn't really get hold of a nuclear weapon and do an artwork with it. So
that would be a pretty hairy move. Yeah. Not recommended. Yeah.
So, but I was thinking, what is the principle of the nuclear bomb? So the nuclear bomb is basically, like this chain reaction of, the fission, like kind of one particle splitting another atom and then creating this chain reaction. So what I started to do was to invite an artist to do a poster against nuclear weapons, and that artist has to nominate 2 other artists. And we started like kind of a call, reaching out to 20 artists, and now we're over 300 artists that have joined the project.
It's like a chain letter. Remember chain letters?
Exactly. The idea of the exhibition, we for instance, like we showed it at the Donald Judd Foundation in Soho, and in Oslo and Berlin and Malta and Copenhagen and Santa Fe, and it's like a exhibition of posters against nuclear weapons that kind of are mix of historical works. There's a lot of artists that have done works against nuclear weapons, like Keith Haring, like Art and Language, who one of the members just passed away this week, like the Guerrilla Girls, many artists, Harold Fletcher, a lot of artists are contributing to the project, and it's a project that is posters that you can print locally. So instead of shipping the work or having insurance involved, etc., you can print the show locally, and that's something that has helped. So this is a kind of initiative that I'm working on at the moment. Try to make visible the work that ICANN is doing.
Yeah. I could keep asking more questions of you. Are we supposed to shift to ask questions or let people ask questions, or shall we keep going? We have 5 more minutes. Okay. What else would I like to ask you about? What did we not cover yet that you want to talk about? Anything? Sorry? Anything that we haven't not covered yet that you want to talk about?
I mean,
anything else on your mind?
Well, I think that just to expand a little bit on this project about the bomb is, it's something that like we've been talking about a lot, you and me, about intergenerational elements, no? And I think that this is something that actually I have found often that people my age or older understand better than young people. This is like kind of the paradox, because younger generation are not a kind of acquainted with what nuclear winter looks like, or
it's not a cultural reference point for them.
Or these events, but there's like this amnesia about this, and I do this out of sincere concern that there's 50, that there's like 50% chance in that we will experience nuclear war in our lifetimes. It's like the thing is that, for instance, the last nuke that had entered into the U.S. arsenal had been in '91. So the thing is that now there's like all this renewal of all nuclear arsenals in all the nuclear armed states, where trillions and dollars are spent in these, like for instance, like Los Alamos National Laboratories is like doing 30 plutonium bombs every year, and Russia is doing the same, and the UK is doing the same, and China and India and Pakistan, France, Israel. There's 9 countries that have nuclear weapons, we live in a century that is highly unstable. We're going to have very big problems like climate change, etc. So we just don't want this. What I'm working out now is kind of trying to find ways to challenge the rhetoric that nuclear weapons are necessary for. There's always the argument, oh well, they have prevented war between the United States and Russia, but it actually has been the opposite. It had created like a number of proxy wars since, starting with the Korean War, right after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or up to Ukraine. So, I think it's, sometimes you have like this kind of utopian ideas that, seem totally out of reach, but if you look at the option, which is, at the end of Earth, or life on Earth, I mean, I'd rather try to push for the utopian vision, that doing nothing. So, I don't know. I mean, I sincerely feel like this kind of kind of a little bit lonely, and especially like doing it from Mexico. That seems to be like kind of a why, no? But in Mexico, we were the first country to ban nuclear weapons. Back in 1960,
I didn't know that.
yeah, we called in all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So a diplomat called Alfonso Garcia Robles, that later went to get the Peace Nobel Prize, invited all these countries, and we created a nuclear-free zone. So no country in Latin America or the Caribbean had ever, the last one to join was Cuba, but this was precisely because during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it became clear that that there would be like an intent either by the United States or by Russia to position nukes in any of these countries. So it was like a kind of okay, well, we're not going to kind of let that happen, and all countries signed this treaty. So that was in '67. And that worked as a blueprint for the Treaty of Pelinaba, which all the African continent became a nuclear-free zone, and then the Treaty of Rarotonga that banned nuclear tests in the Pacific. But all there's a lot of treaties that are falling apart, like the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. All these treaties are kind of ending, and because there's no kind of a cultural or media attention on.
There's no plan, yeah.
Yeah, it's important to keep talking about this issue.
I gotta say though, just like for an artist, I feel like to be holding the weight of that, I'm very glad that you also are able to find like what I imagine is like pleasure and joy in like the production of these objects that are like so beautiful, so collaborative, but also probably in a way, like function as a way to kind of take your mind maybe off of solving of nuclear war into, some meditative sanding of a stone. Or I'm happy that for you that you have both, because that's a lot to be carrying around every day, every
I'm
night.
very grateful for having a kind of a support of
A
collectors.
dualistic practice
because
for your sanity.
Every piece, every sculpture that I sell allows us to keep doing this kind
Yes,
of.
yes. That he can do both. So on that note, we'll open to questions maybe. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Pedro and Mia. We are going to open up to questions. So if you have a question, just put your hand up, and we have mics, and we'll make sure we get the mic to you.
Thank you so much. In the spirit of the dialogical, and thank you, Mr. Descartes. I have 2 sets of questions, if that's okay. One is, we've seen some pictures of libraries, and I'm wondering if either one of those are your own. Which one?
One in concrete.
Okay. So the other question is, what do you think about the theory that arrived after Chernobyl that there was a reconsideration of using the bomb because of the economic impact, and therefore there was an understanding that arms proliferation was about making the other country bankrupt?
I am not acquainted with this theory. I mean, like, obviously, I think that for the United States to have the bomb offered a sort of a first kind of advantage in in the aftermath of the Second World War, but as soon as 1949, when the Russians get their first, that's when the Cold War starts, and you know, like a,
What I'm suggesting is there's a lot more history to consider between, there's a lot more history to consider between Chernobyl, the fall of the wall, and the proliferation of armament around the world thereafter, and it's a much more complex, I think, economically, politically driven problem than climate change problem, which is immediate.
I think there's some other questions in the front.
Pedro, it's always wonderful to see you. I would love you to tell everybody in the audience about a great project that should be installed in 2025 in our new embassy in Mexico City that began germination about 9 years ago, and it's finally coming to fruition, and we should all be very proud that Pedro's mural is going to have sort of the place of honor in our new embassy.
well, yes, like Ellen says, and I'm very grateful that Ellen was the first person who brought me into the art and in embassies project that Kennedy started over 50 years ago, which is, like I mean, like this is a commission of a mural, a quite large mural, and I'm very excited to take on this, like kind of the largest wall drawing that I have ever done, which, as you say, it will be in kind of installed next year at the new building, a beautiful building that is done by Todd Williams, this architecture studio. So it's a very excitement, a very exciting assignment. Oh well, like it also goes. This is like what the mural is again kind of connected with the Tlaquilo, which is like Tlaquilos used to work on a mate paper, and a mate paper is a paper that continues to be done the same way since over 600 years, which, like indigenous communities of San Pablo, Pahuatlán, which is in Puebla, they take this tree and kind of with the pulp of the tree make a paper that is very rich in texture, very, very nice and very resistant. And I have started making paintings on this paper. So when having to, like choose a material to do this mural, I stretched this. I had pieces of paper made especially for me that are in kind of installed in stretchers that together make this kind of large figure, like large composition where there's elements that, again, it's like kind of I'm trying to learn this a vocabulary of names of places that, like that the proper way to write them is through drawings, so pictograms, and these are stylized and enlarged elements of these particles of language that create a sort of linguistic landscape, but that is like kind of a quite colorful and it's like a kind of a take on muralism, although it doesn't look like kind of a murals that you have seen from the past. It's like I wish I had a picture, but like it's very much in the kind of a line of paintings that I've been doing on a mate paper. I have a high respect for painting, and I was always afraid of calling myself a painter, and I would say no, I draw. I don't, but like after several years of painting, now I think that I'm painting.
Any other questions? Oh. No, I think you have to flip the switch up there.
Hello, hello.
There we go.
Thank you so much for your lecture. I really appreciate you explaining all of your social sculptures and understanding that your sculpture studio is also, part of that whole realm. How does the studio support itself financially?
Well, this is, like it's a little bit like the Pareto principle, no? Like you have like 20% of your activities produce 80% of your income, and 80% of your, activities produce only 20% of, so I think that there's a lot of things that, where I'm losing money, in the sense that, for instance, like we're doing documentaries, and we're doing films, and we're doing these exhibitions against nuclear weapons, and the library, and the guns, etc. So, which is a little bit like kind of where a lot of resources go, and like because we hire we're a big team, like nearly 25 persons in the studio, and a lot of them are running these initiatives. And then happily, like the kind of artworks that that are acquired and go into museum collections or private collections, keep kind of let the studio keep a kind of income, but I think it's very important, because one of the reasons I was very interested in today's conversation with Mia is because she has like a very good idea of social practice, as well as all the formal aspects of art. So I wanted to pick images, etc., that could like show that there's a link between these two worlds, no? In the sense that, for instance, like Amendment, this sculpture relates to the workshop of rewriting the, so really the social practice informs the sculpture practice, and it's like a little bit like the idea of an allegory, no? Which is a very classical way for approaching art, no?
I think there's one more question in the back.
We can take one more question. Let me bring that over to you.
Hello. My question has to do with going back to what you said about the moment where you made art for art's sake. Could you talk a little bit more about that time and what pushed that season in your practice?
Well, one could argue that the use of art lies in its uselessness, no? In the sense that it's not really useless, but art is like food for the soul. It's like, for instance, like when you, the kind of solace or reward that you find in art is that the books we read, the movies that we see, the songs that we choose to listen every morning, etc., are things that will kind of give meaning to life, no? So I think that there's art that, if you want art to have a function that is beyond aesthetic, like let's say like to have a environmental or social impact, educational impact, etc., that's great. You're allowed to pursue that. But I think that all art is useful. So there's a sort of applied art notion, but in reality, these labels are a little bit like kind of paradoxical, because what we call conceptual art is kind of a one style, but all art is conceptual. A figurative painting is full of concepts, but certainly this is something that I had to relax and let myself, just kind of have these problems, dwell in these problems that are purely aesthetic, that are, for instance, like composition, contemplation of I think that what an artist does is you try to infuse matter with a sort of spiritual energy. So you try to, you change matter, so you try to project that kind of spiritual energy into the object, and then the object has to be capable of irradiating this spiritual energy to the viewer without you being near it, no? So they have to kind of, that's why the more time that you get to spend with a sculpture, the better. I think that I often say that sculpture is a very jealous goddess that wants you to be by her side all the time, and and be her kind of a servant, or it's I'm working in the shop, and then sometimes it feels like that the work is finished, but then you say, no, there's one little more thing that you have to do, like 1 meter, like more, and you have always to try to give yourself the chance to, it can be one bit better, and eventually they're rushing you because it has to be collected to taken somewhere.
Shippers are coming tomorrow. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being here, everybody.